Many Muslims say that the Quran has never been changed, or that there is no other versions of the Quran. Evidence shows that there were different versions of the Quran until Uthman Affan burned different versions of the Quran. The reason Uthman did this was to try to unify the Muslims and to not have different denominations of Islam, even though we already have different denominations of Islam. The two big denominations of Islam that everyone knows about is Sunni and Shia. Let us start off with the argument that the Quran has never been changed. This argument is supposed to prove that Islam is true and Allah is the true God. But this necessarily doesn't prove that Islam is true because the Bible has been preserved for 600 years more than Islam. Yet the Bible is the most accurately translated at over 95%. So does that make Christianity true? Absolutely not. Not only that, but Muslim scholars that have read the Quran, studied the Quran, and know the Quran say that the Quran's translation is not perfect because there are minor issues. Even in history, they say that the Quran is not perfectly preserved because of Uthman Affan, who also didn't just burn different copies of the Quran, but also burned partial pages of the Quran. So, the Quran you have today is not completed, nor is it the same one you had back then. When Muhammad died, Abu Bakr needed to put an end to a rebellion, and he sent people who had memorized parts of the Quran, and they died. And since they died, they would have lost parts of the Quran. Muhammad's wife Aisha said that 2/3 of Surah 33 was lost. Originally, there were 200 to 300 verses in Surah 33. Now, in Surah 33, there are only 73 verses in the Surah 33. One of the reasons they lost so many pages in the Quran was because of the Battle of Yamamah. Some pages were eaten by sheep, according to Aisha as well. Seriously, out of all of the possibilities, out of all of the things that could have happened, a sheep ate parts of the Quran. Why couldn't someone just stop the sheep? I guess they were too busy writing other parts of the Quran that seemed to be more important than that part of the Quran. Here are some of my questions that need to be answered. How could Allah not prevent this from happening? Why did Allah allow his book to be destroyed? Why did Allah not punish Uthman Affan for burning parts of the Quran? And why didn't Allah not force the sheep to throw it up? Or better yet, why didn't Allah just get another person to write parts of the Quran that have been destroyed? Did Allah just decide he not care about us anymore? When you really get deep into Islam and start reading for yourself, even with guidance of the interpretation of others who know more, you start to realize that Islam is false. You see, there are missing chapters of the Quran, there are missing verses of the Quran, and finally, there are missing phrases of the Quran. How did Allah even let this happen? Was he too busy doing something else? Let us look at the Great Paris Manuscript. The Great Paris Manuscript is one of the earliest manuscripts in Islam. According to scholars, the Great Paris Manuscript and the Quran have some differences. There have been copyist texts, and the texts in the Quran have also been changed. There have been different spellings and grammar problems in the manuscript. If we look at the Quran, we both know that it is not the same Quran as it was back then. Now, I know a lot of Muslims would deny this, but this is just the facts. A manuscript known as BNF Arabic 370A has several places where the verses of the Quran have been erased or replaced. So the modern Quran has texts that have been replaced. There are also texts that are too long for the erased places in the Quran. Then the manuscript was also partially rewritten. So how do we know that the whole manuscript wasn't rewritten to fit the narrative of the Islamic religion? When we look at all of these things that happened to the Quran, it seems like it was not perfectly preserved as Muslims say it is. In fact, it looks like it has been rewritten a couple of times, erased and replaced, lost, or even eaten by a sheep. There have been records that some of the manuscripts that have been changed, and these are according to scholars like Keith Small. These manuscripts have been verified that they have been changed. There are also early Muslim scholars on which chapters should be put in the Quran, and some early Muslim scholars have debated which of these chapters were the original chapters told by Prophet Muhammad. Why would Allah allow such things to happen to His word? We also have to say Muhammad had terrible scholars. We see this in Islamic tradition, and we see that he chose terrible scholars in history. If we choose terrible scholars, or if he chose terrible scholars in history, then the Quran is flawed. If history says that Muhammad chose terrible scholars, then the Quran is also flawed. If Muslims deny any of what I am saying, then they are denying their own tradition, which includes the Hadiths, and they are denying history. We cannot deny history, because if we deny parts of history, but choose other parts of history, then we are picking and choosing. If we are picking and choosing, then how do we know what is true, and how do we know what is false? We can also look at the Sunnah manuscript. Parts of this manuscript have been destroyed by rodents eating it, and water. If the Quran is perfectly preserved, then how come Allah allowed rodents and water to destroy this manuscript? If I pick up a Bible, I really don't have that problem. And the Bible is older than the Quran, 600 years older than the Quran. I have different translations and different versions, but they are all pretty much saying the same thing. The Quran, on the other hand, has a huge problem with keeping up with the Bible, and the Quran is much younger than the Bible. This is just another problem I have with Islam as well. If the Quran is perfectly preserved, then why has there been destruction over manuscripts, and why did Allah allow these things to happen? In fact, we have libraries that have been destroyed in Islamic tradition that prove that the Quran you have today is not the Quran back then. There have been thousands upon thousands of manuscripts that have been lost in war or destroyed in war. If it was perfectly preserved, then we would have those manuscripts, but we don't. Therefore, the Quran cannot be perfectly preserved. If it was perfectly preserved, then most, if not all, manuscripts that support the Quran would not be corrupted or destroyed. So Muslims, if you are watching this video, I want you to think through things. I don't want you to listen to your teachers and listen to their mistakes, because if you listen to their mistakes, you're going to make the same mistakes. You need to study it for yourself. So, have a blessed day, everyone, and God bless.